Today I made some of the worst builds I could think of in Deep Rock Galactic, one for each of the classes. We took them on a Hazard 5 mission in open lobby so anybody could join us. A lot of these were suggested from you guys, and we did try to make the worst possible builds that we could. Our first terrible build was with Scout, and of course we used the GK2, even though the GK2 is not a terrible weapon, it's actually an okay weapon. But we did intentionally make it awful. For an overclock, we went with the unstable overclock of AI Stability Engine, which is actually a pretty fun overclock. It's one of my favorites for the GK2. However, we built this for 0 rate of fire increase and 0 damage increase, which are two things that you're trading off with this. We built it all for accuracy and recoil, which means we built it for basically nothing, because the AI Stability Engine already gives you that. But beyond that, we lost out on hitting that 15 points of damage breakpoint that the GK2 does hit base, which means that you could one-shot swarmers. We could no longer do that with this particular build. And for a secondary, to make it just as terrible, we were running the boomstick, and we were taking double barrel. This is already not a great overclock in the first place. It's okay for fighting just big enemies, but if you want to use the boomstick for anything else, it's really not that great. And of course, we picked the worst things that we could think of for this. Now, to give credit to the boomstick, it is still a really strong weapon, and it will deal massive damage to anything close by. Even without any sort of mods or overclocks, it already does that. But our assault rifle, yeah, that one kind of struggled a little bit. Take a look at this and see how awful this build is. Oh. Potential salvation. Need some damage reduction.
Never felt better.
Take him out, Betsy. Alright, so that one was pretty rough. We actually did make it out. We were the sole survivor that time. Don't know how, but it worked out. And then we moved on to Driller as our second class, and this was suggested from chat as to what we should be using for an overclock for each of our weapons. We are going to be taking the Cryo Cannon with flow rate expansion, because this one has always felt weird to me. I've never really felt way great about it. And we took Heat Pipe with the EPC, because I didn't really enjoy Heat Pipe either. Ever since they changed it, it hasn't nearly been as strong. And we took this on an oil rig mission. There was one major problem with this particular build, though. And it wasn't actually with the build itself. It turns out I actually really like it. For some reason, this worked out really well. I don't know why, but for some reason, this made me much better at just EPC mining with the EPC. I don't know why that was a thing. It was way more consistent than it usually is for me. Usually when I mess with the timings, it is all off. But for whatever reason, this just clicked with me. And the Cryo Cannon built this way, I actually enjoyed it. It was pretty decent. I don't know, maybe next time I'm going to have to try harder to actually make a bad driller build. Take a look at this. It worked out legitimately well. That bad build turns out to be good. Yeah.
Here I go.
I built the worst builds in DRG. This one's actually not one of them. That is really strange. Like, I'm actually getting I'm getting that far more consistently than I ever have with Heat Pipe. Oh, this time turns out that the meta was just Driller, yeah. Turns out the weapon doesn't actually matter, it's just Driller. Driller's the key in all of this. He's the only consistent factor. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. When you build damage drills, you build, or you take the axes, you use your power attack pretty often, you're pretty great just because all of that counts as melee, and almost everything in this game is weak to melee. I think I would still rebuild this one a little bit different, but I'm just really surprised this is actually working. Oops. I didn't even run through ammo very quick this time, did I? So after failing miserably at making a bad driller build, I went on to gunner, which I was far more confident that I could make a bad gunner build. And sure enough, we did. We made bullet hell as our primary overclock for the minigun and built it for basically nothing. It just had stun on it. That was the biggest thing that we could get. And then for a secondary, we took the revolver with elephant rounds. This run did not work out very well for us though. We got overwhelmed. I completely ran out of bullets multiple times. Once I did have bullets for at least the revolver, I was able to kill some things, and even bullet hell wasn't bad against groups. But built the way that I built them, it was just so suboptimal that this one really struggled, and we ended up getting overrun during a fight with the Korlakweed. So we failed this one. However, we did wrap back around to Gunner. We instead did not take this build. Instead, we switched it up. We took manual guidance cutoff with the Hurricane guided rocket system, which in my opinion is probably the worst overclock for the Hurricane because it's really unnecessary and it takes away like the one fun thing with the Hurricane. But even so, it's not necessarily a huge debuff to it. It's just a very boring meh overclock. So that's why I consider it one of the worst ones, whereas like bullet hell is objectively not way strong compared to a lot of the other overclocks from the minigun, but it is incredibly fun to use. And then for a secondary, we paired this with micro flechettes with the burst pistol. Now micro flechettes is not a bad overclock. It's actually a pretty decent one. You can put stun on it and chain stuns together fairly well, and you have a lot of bullets, so it's not bad if you want to take it with like a high damage primary weapon. If you want to take it with like jet fuel homebrew, it's pretty decent then. But this was built to make it the maximum amount of ammo that it could have, and then basically nothing else, which is not really the best because we also put this with 6-round burst, and it chews through ammo, but not at a fast rate, and it doesn't kill anything very quickly. It's kind of an all-around very average man weapon, and it doesn't really do anything in particular all that well. It's just kind of a fun spraying gun. And we managed to get through another Has 5 mission with this. It wasn't too big of a deal. There was some stuff going on here, but I don't think there's any real highlights of this build. This is probably the most mad build that we had. It's not egregiously bad. It's just, yeah, whatever. And then, of course, we had a build for Engineer. Engineer was a bit more difficult for me to think of a bad build for it, because even when I was thinking of bad builds, I was thinking more of you don't have ammo for the build. So I tried to go away from that and maybe go in the opposite direction and just stack as much ammo as I could. So I took Stubby as our primary weapon, and I took lightweight rounds as the overclock. This lessens our damage, lessens our rate of fire, but gives us a lot more ammo, and I just built it all for ammo. And the great thing about this build was I ended up having like 900 rounds in total for Stubby. I think it was 60 in the gun and then 840 out of it. I also had a very slow rate of fire, so I did not chew through those bullets fast at all. Whenever there was a resupply, I still usually had 300 to 400 rounds in reserve, which was kind of crazy. So I never ran out of bullets with Stubby. You could just keep spraying this. And then to go with a secondary that also has a lot of ammo, I went with RJ250, and I tried to build it kind of a wonky build. I just tried to give it as much ammo as possible, but the build was still pretty good. I even put randomized damage on this with fire, although fire is actually pretty good with the RJ250, and it just became a very good like mobility tool. So even when I was trying to make this one bad, it still wasn't that bad. Maybe I should have just built RJ250 for damage and made it kind of redundant. Even then, it probably would have just felt like the basic grenade launcher, where I could kind of fling myself in emergencies for taking a bit more damage than I normally would with RJ250. I did put the proximity trigger on it, which I found is really awful with RJ250. It's fine for shooting into crowds and to using it as an escape from crowds, but it's really not useful outside of that because it's so difficult to line up a grenade where you need it to actually go so that you can fling yourself somewhere else, as opposed to just firing this normally. This build also worked out quite well. It wasn't even necessarily a bad build. It's just kind of a very meh build, similar to the Gunner's one. Not a whole lot to talk about with this. I think Scout and Driller were the two standouts for this. Driller for the opposite reason, because I made something that actually was functional and I enjoyed it. And Scout because it was just frankly horrendous. It was not a good loadout. It was not a fun loadout. The only reason I lived that match was simply because I had the grappling hook and I could just move around the map constantly. If I didn't have that, I would have been dead. And yeah, it was really, really sluggish to do anything as that. So these were 4 supposed to be bad loadouts. There was really just 3 bad loadouts, and well, actually more like 2 bad loadouts and 2 that were, one was good, one was okay. Maybe I'll try this again with other weapons and stuff too. This was really fun to do during the stream. Thanks for watching this. I really do appreciate it. And special thanks to the supporters of this channel. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate your support. If you'd like to see more Deep Rock Galactic content, be sure to click right over here on this playlist. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye!